Troubles going on within the Greek system, the university selecting members of a task force, while it's also dealing with national headlines plastered all over.
Some Texas Tech protesters saying no means no.
You got anger, soul, and more. Take it to the street.
They're going to be waiting for you in a dark corner or a dark alley. And that's not true. They're going to be your best friend. They're going to be someone you're close to, someone you know. They're going to be the guy you're going to dinner with, or to a party to with, or you trust.
I think that all women get raped. The problem with race and rape is how it's handled. If a white girl gets raped, then the world stops. But if a minority gets raped, then it's like, oh, that happens all the time.
I think that's one thing that young girls don't realize. Just because you've met a guy a few times, it doesn't mean that you know him. Even if he has friends that you know mutually that will vouch for him, it still doesn't mean anything. So that wasn't in my mind that rape was like that at the time. I grew up in a very conservative home. Always went to small private schools. We were brought up middle class, very religious, in this bubble. So when I came to this giant university and was away from my parents for the first time, it was terrifying and overwhelming, and I just didn't do well in this environment. I think it was just too much, too fast.
I watch anime. I mean, outside of doing that, I guess I like clothes. I try to participate in fashion shows and modeling in them. That's pretty much it. Usually, I never really went to parties because mainly I didn't like the things that they did.
Originally, I came here for electrical engineering. Yeah, I quickly found out that was not for me.
I like to hike and camp whenever I get the time to do that. I like to travel, definitely love road trips. I like to read, that's fun. I like to play video games. I've always liked to play video games. I'm an only child, so when I was a kid, I had to entertain myself by myself, so I played video games.
So my family is very Southern, a Southern white Baptist kind of feel. They are very much the kind of family that if you don't make an A, then it's failing. And if you make like a 95, then why didn't you make 100? If you make 100, then why celebrate? Because that's the standard. So they chose all my classes while I was in high school, and I left high school with a 4.7 GPA. So I had tons of scholarships, like full rides. But I was so burnt out, so I wanted to take more control over my life, and of course I joined the military.
I don't go to parties anymore. I stopped doing that because they aren't fun. When I was dancing and stuff, I noticed that guys would like to go behind me. One guy even tried to grab me in places that he shouldn't have even been grabbing. So after that experience, I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore.
I'm in a same-sex marriage, so you're going to hear me reference her. This is going to be really personal. I've recently been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Yeah, and that was me noticing, like, hey, you're getting really upset about things that you shouldn't. And I've been dealing with a new medication, and it's been going pretty well. I was on a regimen and everything, but then I developed a rash, and apparently this one type of medication happens to cause that. So I went and I saw my doctor, who told me to stop taking it immediately. And with certain drugs like this, it's really difficult to do that to a person.
Well, I was outed. I was actually outed to my mom a couple times, and my family is very anti-gay. Well, I was outed in the 8th grade, and there was a lot of shame, and it was very much like, what if people were to find out? When I finally came out to my mom after high school, I left for the military so quickly because she gave me 30 days to get out.
What qualifies me to speak on the topic of rape is not my handful of credentials. Rather, what qualifies me is that I was raped. Gang raped in the military by 6 soldiers who I outranked. Surviving the brutality and traumatizing event is what makes me and all survivors of rape experts on this topic. That was very powerful. Who does this person go to? Who does the victim turn to? Someone that won't possibly question the veracity of their statements. Also, and I'll get into this in a little later, but a rape isn't just of a woman's body or a man's body. It's also of their mind, emotion, and spirit. And so it's debilitating to come out of that when you're all by yourself after having been traumatized. You question everything that you knew prior to the rape. You are filled with so much doubt that you even question whether or not reporting is a good idea. It might seem safer just to run into your dorm or your room or someplace away from everyone else and hide.
I felt bad because I let it get to that point. I should have left or broken up with him earlier. But I was so concerned about his well-being and his health because he was my best friend, you know, even before we got together.
I was at one of my friend's houses. I knew him from high school, so I known him for like 6 years. For the size of the house, it was pretty big. There were about 20 people there. People were inside and outside with music playing. I knew about like 7 or 8 people, so my close circle was there. It was a typical evening. There was a group of us that knew the guy hosting the party fairly well from high school. Instead of drunk driving back to Dallas, we just decided to stay the night, crash there.
I met him through friends at home, but at orientation, that was when I really met him. I remember I would always try to get him to see me, to see my value, to understand that I really liked him. We constantly messed around, but mentally, I was tired of trying to prove my worth to someone, so I stopped. But we still stayed in contact.
Yeah, so that day I remember fighting with my spouse, and it was for no reason. Something about one of the kids, and I was just upset for no reason, just angry. And so I went to run an errand, and when I ran the errand, I just cooled down and got my head straight. Damn, I flipped out for no reason. And then I just felt guilty and ashamed, so I did what no person should do in a situation where they're having a mental breakdown.
I got paired with the only other sergeant that was there, and he seemed really cool. He seemed really nice. So I was there for 2 weeks with nothing to do, and he was really into working out, and so was I. So he was starting to go to the gym, and he asked me and some other people to go with him. So we did. And then he invited us to his home to meet his wife and our group the day before I left. He had this kind of house party. And he kept making jokes with me about like, oh, if you weren't gay, I would totally try it.
One misconception would be that rape is a sex crime. Rape is not a sex crime. Rape is a crime of violence, second only to murder. And I would say that the only difference in the severity of the crime is that rape victims live through it. The only difference. I would say it is a misconception that men can't be raped. Well, 1 in 3 females have been raped or will be raped in their lifetime. 1 in 6 males will be raped in their lifetime. I think it is a misconception that there is such a thing as an irrational fear of rape or rape phobia. There is no such thing as an irrational fear of rape because because the fear of rape is a rational response to a real and present danger that exists in society, not a perceived danger. Also, as children, we are often taught to fear strangers. I consider this to be a misconception because in reality, we are more likely to be sexually assaulted by someone that we know or even by a relative than by a stranger. It is a grave misconception that the victim wanted it, that she enjoyed it, that she somehow asked for it to happen to her. Again, I think this goes back to this idea of sort of the virtue of manliness, that surely a woman would enjoy that sexual experience. It is a myth that a woman is lying. And I say this because I hear a lot of doubts when others hear a woman speak of rape, and to even assume that possibly she's wrong, to me is an error in thinking. Because I think it is safer to believe all accounts of reported rape and be wrong less than 5% of the time than it is to assume that most women lie about this, or males. And finally, of course, it is a myth that no means yes. Yes is a deliberate and conscious and consensual yes. That means yes.
It's very hard to make sense of how this all went down. I wasn't sick, I was walking fine, I wasn't out of faculties. I do remember one point later on in the night when I just wanted to stop drinking. I wanted to go to bed, I had a boyfriend, I was just done. So Tim was like, let me get you a glass of water. It was water, not alcohol. So I was like, fine. And I took the glass. That was significant because at the time, I didn't know that date rape drugs couldn't be detected in water.
I trusted him. He had been there over 1,000 times. And I asked him what he was doing, and he said he didn't have any more classes that day, so he wanted to just hang out. He asked me to give him a back massage, because that's what I always did after he'd work out. So I did. And I started to kiss him and stuff, but he told me to stop, so I stopped. And I was like, okay, fine, whatever.
I went and got a 6-pack of beer, and I called my friend, my best friend at the time, and I just said, hey, can I come to your house and just cool off? And he was at work anyway, so he was just gonna let me in just to watch TV and chill. He was aware. He was aware of what I was going through with my medication. He was aware of what I was dealing with my bipolar issues. And when I got there, I was in tears, bawling, and I just kept saying, I just lost it. So he was aware of the situation. And on top of that, I was drinking.
And he got me a lot drunker, or a lot more drunk than I thought I was. And I think my drink was actually spiked. I remember getting really dizzy and then trying to sleep. And I remember bits and pieces, but I remember him. And I remember not being able to do anything because I was too drunk.
I've seen the media, common conversations between groups of people where they will, again, go back to that blaming the victim. It's much easier for society to blame the victim than it is to realize that there are perpetrators that are committing these violent acts on a regular basis. It's much easier to blame the victim who has been deemed helpless, that doesn't pose to be much of a threat to society, than it is to focus on the threat.
So that was at the end of the night. At some point, everyone was asleep, and it was just Tim and I up. I remember him coming towards me on the couch. I was backing away. And I remember telling him, I remember him crawling on top of me. And I said, no, don't. You can't. I remember him tugging at my pants. And that's all that I remember about that night.
And when I went there, it was supposed to be a sit-down, like peace and quiet, but there was a kickback going on, like a party. So I didn't say anything. I just sat there. And eventually, we got into a little argument in front of everybody. And he was like, go into the room. And I'm like, no. So he grabs my arm so hard that it left a mark. And he's like, go in the room. So I go in the room, and I'm in there for like 30 to 40 minutes. So I fall asleep. And he comes in, and he's like, wake up. I didn't think it could get any worse. What can be worse than getting beat? And usually when he hits me, we have make-up sex, and it's always consensual. But not this time. It wasn't like that. I wasn't aroused. So I got up, and I tried to put on my clothes, and he throws me on the floor. And I wasn't into it at all. I had never done anal before. I had never even thought about doing anal. And it hurt so bad. And it went on for like 15 to 20 minutes, but that was the longest thing ever. And then he like forces himself inside of me, and I felt so violated. I shouldn't have felt like that, especially with the person that I was with.
What I think makes me feel so guilty and ashamed is that I don't really remember any of it. I just remember a flash of bodies together. I couldn't even tell you what position. I couldn't tell you on a couch, on a bed, on a chair, or on the roof. I couldn't even tell you. Just like physical bodies. And so about 5 days later, things start to come back. And so I asked him, I said, did we have sex? And he said, are you serious? And I said, no, really, did we have sex? And he said, yes. So I don't know if he assumed that I remembered. I'm not really sure. And then he just kept apologizing, and then I don't really remember what I said to him, but he responded and he said, I just knew that I would never get the chance again. But I feel very shameful and regretful and guilty that I don't really remember it. That maybe I could have possibly egged it on, but at the same time, he knew that I was not in my right mind. I mean, it was obvious. It was like slap you in your face kind of obvious. He knew that my reactions, my emotions were not that of a sound, conscious mind. He was sober. He was conscious. He was supposed to be responsible.
There's also internalized sexism, where women have been hearing for years and years, watch what you wear, watch your drink, don't go home with that person. And instead of teaching her anything positive, it's actually teaching her, if you do get raped, it's your fault because you weren't careful enough. And we just see it over and over again, whether it be in pop culture, in novels, on the internet, and it's just reiterated to young women and young men over and over again as well. I mean, they hear and see these things too, and so they make it becomes in your brain, well, she should have prevented it. She shouldn't have worn that.
His wife helped me to a room where I could sleep. And she was moving things around on the bed so that I could lay down. And then he came in, and I was just saying, like, no, I'm going to go to sleep. And then they were both undressing me. And she was just kind of saying, no, it's fine. It's okay. Don't worry about it. It's fine. I know that she was definitely lying next to me when it happened. Just trying to keep me calm, trying to keep me from fighting. It was like I was viewing it from the outside. Like it wasn't really me. It was happening, and I could see it happening, but it wasn't me. I think I slept just long enough until I was sober enough to wake up. And when I woke up, I felt really confused. And it was very scary and very overwhelming. And then to see him lying on the bed next to me and her next to him and me just lying there naked, I kind of panicked. I grabbed my clothes and I was really, really quiet, and I left and I got in my pickup and I drove 2 blocks away. And I just sat there for a while.
He got up. And he didn't look like the person I always felt like he looked. When he got up, he took off my bottoms. My top half was still on, but my bottoms were off. So I started to push him. And he kept moving my arms. And he literally grabbed them. I didn't scream because I thought that it would ruin his life if I did that. So I just
cry.
That moment just struck me as nothing. Even in the state I was in, I knew that there would be nothing that I could say. He wasn't listening. He wasn't registering it. I was no longer the person he was just talking to as another human being. It's just a switch that happened. There's no emotion.
I want to express that any emotion is a normal reaction to rape. There really isn't a normal reaction to rape. So I'm trying to say, so all emotions are free game, so to speak. But there are certain ones that are more common. It is not just a physical thing, it's the emotional, it's the spiritual, and it's very cognitive and mental in many, many levels. Even more so, I would say, for survivors, because after the rape, your body is generally not at the same level of danger, even though your mind, emotion, spirit is on constant alert that it is going to happen again.
I told a good friend of mine, and she was pissed. She said, "You know you were raped." And I guess at this point I sound like I'm defending him because I want to take responsibility. It's just easier to just take responsibility. And she said, "Nicole, you were raped. He's disgusting." And then she asked me why I wasn't going to the cops. It's his word versus mine. And apparently his word is saying that I egged it on. And I'm in a same-sex marriage in Lubbock, Texas. It's just a recipe for more humiliating experiences for me. And I don't even think anything would happen to him at all. I just don't.
It's part of rape culture that we tell women that they are going to be blamed for their rape. And if they go to law enforcement, they think that they will be blamed or that they don't have enough evidence. They know that that's also starting a process where they may have to confront their rapist, where they may have to tell their family, their friends, people that they know that they were sexually assaulted, and they may not want to do that.
I remember we used to all hang out. We would all go together to get dinner at Sam's. I remember we were all sitting down and he was just talking. That night, I didn't even want to be there, but I went. And I remember we got onto that topic, and he says, "You want to know how you know you did a good job? When you make her cry."
And when I got home, I was just crying. The only thing I can think about was, man, I wish my dad was there. Until this day, he still doesn't know. Nobody knows. I told my best friend at the time, but So I get in the shower and I stay in there for a really long time because I'm bleeding. And I throw my pants away. I guess I could have washed them, but the memories would have stayed, so I just threw away everything I was wearing.
I think that I blamed myself because I was brought up in a good home where good girls didn't go out and drink like I did, and were taught abstinence until marriage, and I had lost my virginity a year or two before. I don't think that I deserved the same amount of respect as a girl who kept herself pure should get. I think at that point, I lost the ability to care at all. I was reckless with my drinking, my attitude, my behavior. Because at that point, it didn't matter if I lived.
People always ask me why I never said anything my freshman year. But I was someone who messed around a lot. So who would believe it? People do that in college all the time. I'm like, who would even believe it?
I think we still live in a culture where as soon as a woman says she was raped, in their minds, if not verbally, people say, I wonder what she did. People still, the automatic is, she did something to get herself raped. And women know that. We're taught that implicitly and explicitly from the moment that we start going out into the world alone. And so I think a lot of people just don't want to face that.
It was so hard. I had begun to develop these thoughts that anything that happened in my life was my fault. And I really wanted to kill myself, but people needed me. And that's what kept me around. My sister needed me. There's times where she'd see me crying or wiping my eyes, or I'd walk out of my room with my eyes red, and one day I just laid in her lap and I cried. She didn't know what was going on, and she's so young. She's like 8 years younger than me. She's like 9. And she just let me cry, and I really needed that.
I've got to say something. This is part of what I say.
1, 2, 3, 4. We won't take it anymore.
It is my hope that the Women's Studies Department at Tech and all across the world can teach the history of feminism, rape culture, and patriarchy. And that one day when I ask you to raise your hand if you know someone who's been a victim of abuse, no one will need to raise their hands. When all of these things happen, we will know we have risen. Our voices have been heard and our work is done. We are 1 billion rising, and in this moment, we can feel safe, we can dance, we can love, and we can make change.
It is also paramount, I feel, this is something that we can all do, is to view survivors as heroic, not victims, not the helpless victims, which is a very good question, but to view them as heroic and brave and courageous for not only living through the experience, but for countering community rejections and criticisms.
Eventually, I decided to move out of my parents' house, and I got my own place, and decided to go back to a real school, a community college. So it was just these really incremental baby steps. Eventually it became bigger steps, and now I can look back at these small steps and be so grateful for the small amount of bravery it took just to get up and do something, even if it seemed so small and insignificant, because that's what walked me right through my healing process.
I'm not going after the person who did this to me, so the least I can do is get my story out there and maybe put a face to a certain type of sexual assault that maybe flies under the radar, that maybe people don't realize is sexual assault. I feel violated. And from what I understand, the person that did this to me knows that it was a violation. And so it's important for the story to be told because I feel like it's not the first time that it's happened. Consent is taken too lightly. Consent is often seen as just a yes, no matter the circumstances. That's the problem with rape culture. There are no boundaries practiced, when in reality, there are certain boundaries that are necessary when it comes to a person's autonomy.
It's so hard to heal, and I thought I can do it alone, but I couldn't do it alone. And you really need to talk to someone. It's a lot easier said than done. I think it should start at home with parents telling their children their self-worth. I didn't know my self-worth. And not saying that kids with self-worth can't get raped, but I just think that if you have self-worth, you won't be like me and put yourself in a situation like that. But now I know my self-worth, and I love myself.
So, I actually went to counseling, and it really helps. My future seems bright, and I feel like I can overcome this, and then I can help others before something happens to them, or if they just need someone to relate to or talk to if something does happen.
I think that sexual partners need to know that it's an invasion of your body, your mental space, your spirit. That you have to be patient with the trauma that will come up in sexual relationships. The idea that it doesn't affect women that much or that it goes away once the physical wounds are gone is just a misunderstanding that people need to come to terms with. It just takes a lot of time.
You know, the Scarlet Letter story, let's remove that Scarlet Letter. Because not a single woman or male that is ever raped asked for it. Never wanted it to happen, did nothing to deserve it. Nothing. You know, I hear the stories, oh, she was drunk. Who cares? She could be drunk, naked, dancing in the middle of a table. That doesn't condone rape. That isn't her asking to be raped. That is her expressing herself. That's all that is. And so I think that the misconceptions that there are some women that deserve it, that good girls don't get raped, we need to get that out of society because it's hurting those of us that have been raped, that don't want to be bad girls because we didn't do anything to ask for it.
Everyone heals in a different way, and that process is a long one, and we'll have lots of different periods. And so I would say, you know, if it feels powerful to you, if it feels healing to tell your story, then do. And if you do want to tell that story, I can assure you that there is another young woman or young man out there who has also been assaulted and will hear it and know that they're not alone.